Okay, so this Mustang Bullitt right here was the first Bullitt Mustang I had ever seen in my life. This was the most influential New Edge Mustang that I would ever come to know until I got mine. So this Bullitt belonged to the owner of the Ford dealership who lived a few streets down from me growing up. He was a family friend. He was a really nice guy. He owned the Ford dealership. He had plenty of cars. He had Ferraris. He had the original Eleanor from Gone in 60 Seconds. He had vintage Corvettes. He had drag cars. He had everything. He had a beautiful, huge home with a 15-car garage. And he would take me around when I was young. We were in the same church group, and after church or after church activities, he would give me a ride home. And I was so lucky to ride around in this car in 2001 when it was brand new. Now, the first time I saw this car, it was parked in his driveway, and I had no idea what a Bullitt was. And I wondered why this guy, who's a multimillionaire and had so many cars, would choose to have a green Mustang, let alone one with no rear spoiler. I was really wondering why he would choose that car. So I talked to him about it, and he said, well, this is a Bullitt Mustang. And he went on to tell me why they're special and that they're a new thing that Ford had just come out with. And this one is actually Bullitt number 974. If you notice on the side of the fender, he's added Bullitt badges. There's the Bullitt badge on each side, and where the hole for the GT badge alignment was, he filled it in with a 9mm Bullitt casing. And it's hard to tell in this picture, but you can see he added GT side scoops. He liked them better than the Bullitt ones. And he had told us how one of them even blew off at 150 miles an hour. So he's had them repainted and everything, had GT ones put on, and even a replacement one after that. It is very difficult for me to explain what this car means to me. I fell in love with this car. For whatever reason, I decided that the Bullitt Mustang was going to be my favorite car. This was back in 2001, before the Terminator, before the Mach 1s, and I really just decided that this was going to be my favorite car from now on. So I'd go over to his house, and he would let me wash it, and he'd take me for rides in it, and I just got to love the car. Now, at this time, I was about 16 years old, and I was riding my bike to school, and I would ride past the Ford dealership and look at all the New Edge Mustangs, and I would go and I would see other Bullitt Mustangs sitting on the lot. They had 2 green ones and 3 black ones that just sat there. It was funny that they didn't sell. They seemed like they were on the lot for quite some while. But anyway, I really fell in love with the car, and he took me for rides in it down some back roads. He had put a Vortex supercharger on it, on 9 pounds of boost, and it made about 435 horses, what he estimated. I guess it wasn't dyno tuned. On Tuesday nights, we'd have church activities, and I was there with the youth activity, and he was there with leadership in the church. And he would go into meetings, and he would leave the car unlocked and let me just sit in the driver's seat, open all the doors, look under the hood, and he just let me look all over the car, and he didn't really worry about it much. Like I said, he had cars that were worth a whole lot more. And to him, it was a cool car, but I don't think he was super in love with it. But anyway, you could see he had done some other things to it. He added the SSR GT3 wheels, some Weldon Flowmasters, and like I said, a supercharger. And he used to race it down in Las Vegas and teach racing school in it for a little bit as well. One day we were riding around in it, and I asked him, how much does a car like this cost? And he said, well, open up the glove box and look in there. And I pulled out the window sticker, and my heart sank when I saw that it was like $26,000. I couldn't believe it was that expensive, and I knew that there's no way I was going to get a car like that. Not even like in the near future. And I had no idea that cars depreciated and that they would eventually go down in value. And I was really in love with this car, and I said, hey, maybe you could keep this and sell it to me later. But I don't think he really took me seriously. But anyway, something really important about this to realize is this was before Craigslist was big. This was before eBay. eBay had just kind of started up with selling cars, as far as I knew at the time at least. And if you wanted a car, you had to find it in a newspaper listing, or you had to call dealerships and see if somebody had it. And even the internet presence for dealerships was low. There wasn't really any way to find a car like this. And so I felt like once they were gone, I'd never see another one again, unless I got lucky and found one on a car lot somewhere. But anyway, he'd take me around in it, and I just fell in love with the car. And every chance I'd get, I'd go look at it. When we'd drive home as a family to our house, we'd pass the street where the Bullitt was, and I would always look up and see it parked there in the driveway. My other video has the time I took a low mileage Bullitt for a test drive, and I parked in his driveway. So if you've seen that video, then you know what I'm talking about. One time we were riding in the Bullitt, and we went to his son's work, which was a detail business, auto detailing business, and we were there for a little while. We just wanted to go with him anywhere he'd go, as long as we had a chance. And Danny Johnson was with me and my other friend, and he had these little mini bikes that we raced there at the dealership, the car dealer or whatever, and just had fun with it everywhere we'd go. But I remember we were leaving once, and his son came out and said, "Hey, can that thing peel out?" And his son was mocking a comment that someone else had made about the Bullitt down at the races. I guess that someone was really rude and said that to him. And I remember the guy who owns the Bullitt was like, he just kind of laughed, and he started to idle off, and then he just dropped the clutch and just billowed smoke out of the tires as we just went sideways all the way down the street. And then we let off, and we slowed to a stop to the stop sign as this cloud of smoke just covered the car. And then right in front of us, a police officer went by. And I was like, "Hey, that's a cop." And he was like, "Yeah, he doesn't know anything." And he power slid behind the opposite way the cop was going and just drifted into the street and drove off. I think he had some connections with the police, maybe because he was well known in town, and because he owned the Ford dealership, and so they serviced all the police cars, I'm sure. I actually recorded that in my journal. I wrote down that story. The church encourages us to keep a journal, and as terrible as I was at it, there were like 5 entries in my journal, and that was one of them. So it's one of those things where, as a 16-year-old kid, that's going to mean a lot to you. And the sound of the engine and the supercharger was burned into my mind, and I just loved hearing that and being a part of that experience. Well, anyway, time went on, and he sold the Bullitt, and it totally crushed me. It broke my heart. I couldn't believe he would sell the car. He bought an Evo instead because it was faster around the track with the all-wheel drive. And to him, that's what he was interested in. He was racing cars, and he was interested in trading them around. You know, he had an original GT350, a 66. That was a race car. It may have actually been a 65. That was an actual race car with race history. And I remember looking at it in his garage, and on the side window in vinyl, in cursive, it said "for sale." And I said, "Is this car for sale?" And he said, "Yeah, everything's for sale." He said, "For the right price, everything's for sale." So to him, cars were more like trading cards. You know, he'd buy one here, he'd sell one there, he'd, make some money off of them, he'd trade them. He just had a huge variety, and the Bullitt turned out to be just part of that. But to me, it crushed me to see that car go. And somebody else in town got it, and I saw it once driving by the mall, and that was the last time I saw it. Until I was driving with my friend. This is my friend here with me. And we were in the Blue Mach 1. I had just bought the Blue Mach 1, and I was just getting ready to buy my first house. And I saw the Bullitt sitting in a side yard. And I had no idea how it got there. I was totally shocked. I said, "That is the Bullitt. I know that's the Bullitt." We drove up, and I saw the badges on the fenders, the SSR GT3 wheels. And on the back of the car, there's a badge underneath the Bullitt badge that his son, who owned the detail shop, had put some vinyl stickering down that said SC for supercharged 435. That's for 435 horsepower. So I knew that this was his car. Now, this was years later, so I couldn't believe the car was still in town. I know it had been sold once. And so I had to knock on the door and ask the owner, "What's the story with the car? Why is it sitting on the side of the house?" So I knocked on the door, and this rather attractive girl opened the door. Kind of took me off guard. I was like, "Oh, hello, hi," and she was like, "Hey, what you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just wondering about this car on the side of the house. I believe that's the first Mustang I ever rode in. I'm just trying to get some information about it." And she was like, "Oh, yeah, cool. Here's the key." And she went over to the table and got the key. And she's like, "Yeah, you can look in it, whatever you want." And then she shut the door and let me go and just have at it. And so the battery was dead, so that's probably why she didn't care that I got into it, because it wouldn't start anyway. But the battery was dead, and the battery was actually relocated to the trunk. I remember seeing that later. But I opened it up and I put the key in the ignition, and it had enough just to light up the cluster. And I was shocked to see that it only had 19,000 miles on it. I guess it turns out that the guy who owned the car was an older gentleman, and he had some health problems, and so he was just letting it sit. It smelled brand new, and it had a multicolored peace sign hanging from the mirror, so I think the girl had been driving it around. But anyway, I opened the hood, and there was the Vortex supercharger. I was surprised it was still on there. I guess I shouldn't be. I mean, it would have taken a lot of work to take it off, but I knew this was the car. I didn't know much about the car before. I didn't know about superchargers and things, but now it had been several years, and been actually about 8 or 9 years now. And so now I looked it over and said, "Wow, this thing's got a blower on it," which I knew about, but I was kind of excited to see how it all was plumbed and how it worked and everything. And so I looked it over, and I asked if I could come back, and she said yeah. And I came back with my brother, and we talked to the guy who I think was her boyfriend or the son of the guy who owned the car. And so we got talking to him. I told him how important the car was to me, that I had grown up with it and everything. And he was like, "Hey, well, the car's for sale if you want it." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And I was thinking, crud, I'm about to buy my first house right now. I need all the money I have for down payment. I just bought the Blue Mach 1 a little bit earlier, and I didn't want to get rid of it either. And I said, "Well, how much do you want for the car?" And he said, "Well, it books for about 10,000, but it's got the wheels, so add 1,000 there. It's got a supercharger, add about 4,000 there. Exhaust, add another 500." And so he's like, I want like 16,000 or something." And I was like, "No, that's just way out of there." Not to mention the fact that he didn't pay to put all that stuff on. I know where all that stuff came from. But anyway, I was interested in the car, but I wasn't in a position to buy it, and I didn't have the money. I mean, I could have, but I would never have been able to buy my house and everything. So he went on to tell some stories about the car. We noticed that the front driver's side tire had a donut on there, a spare tire. You can't see it in the picture, but we're wondering what happened to the other wheel. And he said, "Yeah, I let my friend drive it, and he went out to Hurricane, and he was speeding, and he got in this high-speed chase with the police. They flipped around and tried to chase him, and he went through a neighborhood, and he went around a corner really fast and slid into a curb and jumped the curb and nailed a rock and broke the wheel into pieces. And they pulled him out, arrested him, and then luckily they called me and had me come down and get the car without impounding it." And I was like, "Holy crap, this car's been through some hard times, And then he'd go on to tell me, "Yeah, it's really fast. I beat on it all the time. I race Corvettes, and I beat Corvettes with it." And the stories just kept coming. And I thought it kind of made me not want the car anymore after hearing what they had done with it. But I still wanted the car. I was very emotionally attached to it. So anyway, I wasn't going to buy it. I thanked him for his time. He gave me the Bullitt badge out of the glove box. There was an extra Bullitt badge. You can see how the extra Bullitt badges on the fenders are there. The original owner, who I knew, had just grabbed a handful of those badges out of inventory, and he put them on the fenders, and he had one in the glove box. And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, you can keep that if you want." So that's where I got it, and I talk about that in one of my other videos on how I used it to help align my Bullitt's badge. So I bought my house, and I'd look over every time I drive down that street, and I'd see the Bullitt parked there in the side yard. And one day it was gone, and I saw a listing for it on the internet. I saw it had gone up about 4 hours north, and it was for sale at a dealership. and they did something extremely terrible. And if you're in the Bullitt community, you know this is a big no-no. They thought that the car would sell better if it had a spoiler, so they drilled holes in the back and they added a spoiler. You know, they painted one dark Highland green and added it to help the car sell. And it sold to some teenager, and so that teenager I would come to talk to later because he listed the car for sale. And so I called the number in the ad and I talked to him for a little bit about the car and told him what it meant to me. And he didn't really care. He was like, are you just reminiscing or do you want to buy the car? And I was like, well, I'm interested in the car for the right price. And he still wanted like 13 or something. It was still just too much at the time for me. And he had run it up to like 50 something thousand miles on it now. And he said, well, between you and me, I don't think the engine in this car is going to last much longer. I said, oh yeah? He said, yeah, I've beat the living snot out of this thing. I've done burnouts racing. I don't think this engine's going to last very long. It's still a stock engine anyway. And, you know, I asked him, have you ever changed the supercharger oil? Have you been up on the maintenance? And he's like, no, I just drive it. And basically, he drove it like he stole it, kind of a thing. So he put some chrome Bullitt wheels on it and tinted the taillights, and that was about it. So I saw the car again. I couldn't really buy it at the time. And he sold it to somebody else. And so a couple years went on, and I never saw the car again. And I went up to the local races. They had an autocross course set up here in town, and everybody from northern Utah went to that autocross because it was all snowing up north and everything, and people would come down for that. And I just went to go check it out and see what was up. And I couldn't believe it, but when I showed up, I looked over and I saw something green, and sure enough, there was the Bullitt again. Now, at this time, I had my blue Bullitt now, and I was so excited to see the green one there. And I went over and walked around. The drivers of all the people racing were all in a driver's meeting, so I had some time just to look the car over. I could see the badges were still on it, the chrome Bullitt wheels from the other owner. The taillights were actually switched back from tinted, and I looked over the car and I was just so excited to see it, and I couldn't wait to talk to the person who owned it. And so it turns out that the owner was a young kid, and his dad has this white GT with a turbo kit on it, and they own a restaurant, I'll just say that. And so the dad's way into the cars, and I think the son was just a little bit into it, didn't really care, but his dad helped him find the car and buy it. And so they've got into racing together, and so they autocrossed the car. And so I talked to the kid, and he didn't really seem to give a crap. You know, he's like, oh yeah, it's Mustang. You know, he didn't know much about the car at all. As I asked him questions, I could tell he didn't really understand what it was. And so he talked about putting a body kit on it and getting rid of the side skirts, and I told him those were really hard to find, so if you do, let me know. So anyway, I realized that the car is basically in good hands. The dad seemed to know what he was doing, and I don't think the car was going to have any problems. And if the engine blew on it, I'm sure the dad would repair it, because the dad had a race MMR engine in his and everything. But I started looking over the car, and I couldn't believe it. It was pretty trashed. I mean, look at the scratches on this fender. If you look, you can see they're just all up and down, you know, like as if they were working on the car and they just leaned over the fender and just gouged it up. And the panel fitment on that front fender and door was a little jacked up. I don't know if it had got bumped, or maybe from that rock accident it had jacked some things up. And so he was nice enough to let me look over the car and let me open the hood. It was filthy underneath, and I looked under there and I could see the Bullitt number and everything, make sure that I knew what number it was. It was number 974 and everything. And you know, I've seen videos of him later on, you know, Facebook, of drifting around and kind of beating on the car. And as much as I told him what the car meant to me, I don't think he can understand at all what this car is to me. And so I'd tell him, you know, yeah, this is a cool car. And then my brother told him how cool it was, and he's like, yeah, everybody loves my car. It's like, no, it's just me and my brother, basically. You know, because, you know, at different times, you know, on Facebook and stuff, we'd comment on the car if he was on, you know, the Utah Mustang page and stuff. And he'd be like, yeah, everybody loves this car. Everybody from St. George is in love with it. And I'm like, well, actually, it's just me and my brother, the only ones who know about the car. But Anyway, kind of gave him a big head, but he didn't seem like he cared much about the car. Maybe he does, but he just doesn't show it. So um, he came back down a couple times with his dad for different events, and so I got to see the car again. But I realized that the car's not really going anywhere. He's probably going to hold on to it for a while, and frankly, I wouldn't really pay much for it at this point with, all the scratches and accident history and stuff. Although there's no doubt in my mind that this car is extremely special to me, and that, if it came up for the right price, I would like to own it one day. But um, at this point, I'm just happy to see it and see that it's still intact and that somebody does care for it, even if it's not in the best shape. But anyway, this is the Bullitt Mustang that started it all for me. This is what got me way into new edges, even more than I already was. This is the car that I rode around in, the first Mustang I ever rode in. A very special car to me, and I'll leave a clip here of him just driving on the auto course with it. That's all I really have of it. But anyway, thanks for watching. I really can't explain how important this car is to me and what it means to me and everything, but I hope you get the idea.